Racist deputy tries to incriminate a black judge, but when he finally discovers the judge's true identity, he completely desperates. What happens when a man who believes he is above the law discovers that his own morality is at stake? This is the question that looms over the life of Police Chief Richard "Rick" Owens, a man caught between his prejudices and the reality around him. In a small town in the southern United States, where racial segregation still echoes in the social structures, Rick finds himself in a conflict that could not only ruin his career, but also his relationship with his son. The town is marked by its old buildings and decaying streets, reflecting a past of racial discrimination that still permeates the present. Rick, a 52-year-old white man, has commanded the local police for over 2 decades. From a young age, he was taught to see people through a distorted lens, where the color of someone's skin determines their worth. The son of a former high-ranking officer, Rick has always felt entitled to maintain order, and any threat to that balance, especially from black individuals, is viewed as a danger to be eliminated. However, in his quest for control, he ignores the cracks in his personal life where the emotional distance from his wife, Emily, and his son, Nathan, begins to widen. Nathan, in turn, is a 28-year-old young lawyer, freshly graduated and full of ideals. He has always admired the figure of Michael Carter, a black judge fighting against social injustices in the town. The interactions and respect Nathan develops for Michael lead him to question his father's teachings and the tradition of racism that has been imposed on him. When Rick receives an anonymous tip about corruption involving Michael, his mind, already predisposed to prejudice, sees an opportunity to incriminate the judge and remove a threat to his control. He joins a group of local businessmen who also see Michael as an obstacle to their financial interests, unaware that this plan will lead him down a path of despair and unexpected revelations. As Rick attempts to forge evidence and manipulate witnesses, the tension escalates. In a tense courtroom, Michael stands out as a voice of justice, challenging the norms that keep the town in a cycle of discrimination. He is a beacon of hope for the black community, which sees in him the possibility of a more just future. Over time, the plot thickens when Rick discovers that Michael was the lawyer who saved his son from a false accusation of police abuse years ago. This revelation places him in a deep moral dilemma, forcing him to confront not only his actions, but also his ingrained beliefs. The tension reaches its peak when Nathan confronts Rick in an emotional showdown inside the family's old house, demanding that his father abandon the plan to incriminate Michael. In this moment, Rick finds himself challenged not only by his son, but by his own convictions. He must decide between preserving the legacy he has built as police chief or yielding to a new understanding of justice and morality. As the truth about Rick's actions begins to emerge, the town, which has always seen him as a figure of power, starts to divide in its loyalties. Thus, the story reveals not only the conflicts of a man in search of control, but also the internal struggle between prejudice and the truth that can transform him. Rick's journey, set against a backdrop of racial tension and personal challenges, questions what it truly means to be a leader and how far one should go to preserve their own image. Rick Owens walked through the streets of his town, the shadows of the old buildings reflecting the weight of his decisions. The atmosphere was heavy, and he felt the community's gaze on his shoulders. The anonymous tip about Michael Carter had initiated a whirlwind he did not expect. The idea of incriminating a man who, for a brief moment in his past, had saved his son from a potential injustice tormented him. Rick could not shake the image of Nathan, his son, in the courtroom, defended by Michael. It was a moment that should have brought pride, but had now turned into a spiral of doubts. Nathan had always been Rick's pride. Since childhood, the boy had a restless and questioning spirit, traits that Rick tried to mold as if they were clay. But over the years, Nathan developed his own convictions, directly challenging what Rick tried to impose. Their relationship had become tense, and Rick felt betrayed by his son's newfound admiration for Michael. As a police chief who had always considered himself above the law, he was unprepared to deal with this kind of emotional betrayal. Meanwhile, the town was divided in opinion. The businessmen who had joined Rick were increasingly anxious to remove Michael from power. They saw him as a threat to their financial interests, which further fueled the hatred Rick felt. What had started as a plan to maintain order was turning into a personal clash, where the line between right and wrong began to blur. His quest for control was becoming an emotional trap, and he started to feel surrounded by those he once considered allies. One night, as Rick reviewed documents in his office, Emily, his wife, entered. She was a strong woman, but the years of tension and misunderstandings were beginning to wear down her patience. Seeing her husband absorbed in his thoughts, she decided to confront him. "Rick, you can't keep going like this. What you're doing isn't right. This isn't who you really are," she said, her voice laden with concern. Rick looked at her, irritated. It was as if a part of him wanted to open up, but another part closed off, fearing vulnerability. Nathan, on the other hand, was immersed in his own battle. As a lawyer, he was determined to uphold justice and truth, even if it meant confronting his own father. He knew that the corruption Rick was trying to forge was an affront to what he stood for. In his conversations with Michael, he had discovered the need to fight for a better future for his community. Nathan felt torn. The respect he had for Michael was profound, but his love for his father also kept him bound. One night, Nathan decided to visit Michael in court. He wanted to better understand the situation and perhaps find a way to help. Upon entering the room, he saw Michael speaking with other lawyers and community members. The judge's presence emanated strength and integrity, qualities Nathan wished for himself. The conversation he had with Michael was enlightening. The judge shared stories of his own struggles against prejudice and injustice, showing Nathan that true strength lay in defending what was right, even when it meant going against figures of authority. Meanwhile, Rick felt the pressure mounting. The anonymous calls he received, the secret meetings with businessmen, everything was accumulating to a break-in. He realized he was losing control not only over the situation, but also over his family. The challenges that arose seemed insurmountable. The lies he was about to tell to incriminate Michael were turning into a burden he could no longer bear. The situation reached its peak during a family dinner. The tension was palpable as they sat at the table. Rick tried to keep the conversation light, but Nathan's words about the importance of truth began to echo in his mind. He realized that in his quest for power, he was destroying everything that truly mattered. The ensuing discussion was an explosion of emotions, where each person expressed their frustrations, fears, and longings. Nathan challenged his father to look within himself and recognize who he truly was. At that moment, Rick found himself facing a dilemma. The convictions that had always guided him were being questioned by those he loved most. He began to feel the pain of betrayal, not just from Nathan but also from his own actions. The internal battle between what he believed was right and what his morality demanded was about to explode. As Rick tried to cling to control, the fissures in his personal life widened, and the true struggle for his soul was just beginning. The night was heavy and silent, but within Rick, a storm was brewing. He sat at the table staring at his plate, unable to touch the food. Nathan's words still resonated in his mind. "You need to look within, Dad." His son's challenge cut like a blade, and Rick realized that his fight was not just against Michael, but against himself. He remembered the days when he dreamed of being a just father, someone who would inspire his son to do what was right. Now, he felt like an imposter. Meanwhile, Nathan was fighting his own battles. The heated dialogue he had with Rick at the dinner table had opened a wound that would not easily heal. The pain of watching his father sink into corruption consumed him. He wanted to believe that there was still hope, that Rick could change. But with each passing day, Nathan felt more distant from the father he once knew. His admiration for Michael grew, while his disappointment in Rick deepened. He knew that if he wanted to make a difference, he needed to be strong. And that strength led him to intensify his fight, seeking allies in the community, organizing meetings, and raising awareness about the need for justice. Nathan's actions did not go unnoticed. Rick began to realize that his son's influence was growing, and that made him uneasy. To him, this was a betrayal. He could not see that this quest for justice was, in fact, a reflection of Nathan's love and hope for a better world. The tension between them increased with each new meeting Nathan organized. Rick felt pressured, not only by the community, but also by his own son, who was becoming an important figure in the fight for justice. Before we continue with this gripping story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories. And let us know in the comments which city you're watching this video from. However, the pressure was not only coming from Nathan. The businessmen who had once supported Rick began to show impatience. They wanted results and were willing to do whatever it took to see Michael out of the way. One businessman, George, who had always been a close friend, began to question Rick's leadership. "You're losing control, Rick," he said in a meeting. "We need to act quickly or all of this could fall apart." George's words echoed in Rick's mind, and the feeling of being cornered intensified. One night, While walking through the city streets, Rick came across a group of protesters. They were holding signs demanding justice and crying out against corruption. One of them, a woman with disheveled hair and a determined look, shouted, "We're tired of lies. We want the truth." Rick's heart raced. He felt like an intruder in his own city, and guilt began to weigh on him like a burden. The image of Nathan's face, so similar to his own, flooded his mind. He didn't want his son to see him as a villain. The tension reached its peak when Rick decided to confront Nathan. In a moment of desperation, he went to his son's office, where Nathan was reviewing documents for an upcoming meeting. "Why are you doing this?" Rick asked, his voice trembling. Nathan looked at his father, frustration and sadness evident on his face. "Because it's right, Dad. And you know that. What's at stake is bigger than both of us." Rick felt a wave of emotions. He wanted to scream, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he turned and walked away, feeling defeated. The sense of helplessness consumed him. He was distancing himself from the only person he truly loved, and that made him realize that his struggle against Michael had turned into a fight against his own son. In the following days, external pressure increased. Anonymous calls became more frequent and threatening. Rick began to feel like a ghost of himself, trapped in a maze of lies and subterfuge. His health started to deteriorate. Sleepless nights and the weight of guilt began to affect his body. He looked in the mirror and saw a man he barely recognized. What had he become? With the situation becoming unsustainable, Rick decided he needed a fresh start. He remembered moments when he had made wrong decisions, moments that had cost him dearly. With that in mind, he began to question his allies. Were they really friends or just people interested in their own gains? Doubt consumed him, and the fissures in his personal life widened. Rick's true battle was no longer just about bringing down Michael, but about finding a way to redeem himself in Nathan's eyes. He knew he would need to face not only the external world, but also the demons that inhabited his mind and heart. The moral dilemma consumed him, and the choice he now had to make weighed on him like an unbearable burden. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainties, but one thing was clear: he could not escape who he truly was. On a rainy afternoon, Rick decided he needed some time alone to reflect. The weight of the past weeks accumulated like dark clouds above his head. He stepped away from the office, far from the curious glances and the demands surrounding him. He walked the wet streets, the sound of rain hitting the ground, echoing in his confused thoughts. Each drop seemed to whisper memories of a past he was trying to forget, but that haunted him with every step. It was in a nearly deserted park, with the trees swaying under the force of the wind, that Rick sat on a bench. He watched the raindrops sliding down the leaves, and a sense of familiarity enveloped him. That was exactly how he felt, trapped in a web of wrong choices, slipping further away from the person he wanted to be. As he reflected, a familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. It was a woman, an old colleague named Lisa, who approached with an umbrella. "Rick, what a surprise to see you here," she said, a friendly smile on her face. He returned the smile, but something inside him was not right. Lisa noticed. "You look worried. Is everything okay?" Rick hesitated, but the concern in her eyes encouraged him to open his heart. He told her about the struggle with Michael, about the pressure from the community, and especially about the growing distance between him and Nathan. As she listened, Lisa frowned and said, "Rick, you need to understand that what your son is doing is not a betrayal. He is seeking justice, something you've always wanted for him. You cannot let your own failures drive a wedge between you." Those words hit Rick like a lightning bolt. He realized that for so long, he had seen Nathan's struggle as a personal attack. But hearing Lisa, he began to reconsider. Nathan was not fighting against him. He was trying to fix what was broken, seeking a better world, not just for himself, but for everyone around him. The revelation hit him hard. He had become what he had always repudiated. The rain began to fall more heavily, and Rick felt the cold water on his face, as if it were washing away his doubts and fears. He remembered when he was younger, full of ideals and hopes. What had happened to that man? What had led him to lose his way in the path of corruption and betrayal? He could no longer ignore the truths presenting themselves before him. After the conversation with Lisa, Rick decided he needed to take action. He could no longer hide behind lies and allies that were not genuine. It was time to confront Michael, but more importantly, it was time to make amends with Nathan. He needed to be the father he had always wanted to be, a role model to be followed rather than one to be avoided. In the days that followed, Rick began to change his approach. He stepped away from meetings with businessmen deciding he no longer wanted to be part of that network of corruption. Instead, he started getting involved in the activities that Nathan organized. He joined awareness groups and became an advocate for the justice his son so longed for. With every small action, he felt a little lighter, as if he were shedding a weight off his shoulders. When he finally met with Nathan, the tension filled the air. But now Rick was determined to be honest. "Nathan, I realized I was wrong in how I viewed you and your struggle. I let my failures blind me. I want to support you. I want to be a father you can be proud of." The words came out with difficulty, but as he spoke them, Rick felt as if a huge burden had been lifted from his heart. Nathan was surprised, but the sadness in his eyes began to dissipate. He realized that behind the frustration he felt, there was a genuine desire for reconciliation. "I just want you to be by my side, Dad. Together, we can make a difference." The connection between father and son began to be restored, and with it, Rick found a new strength. He understood that true success was not in power or wealth, but in the ability to confront his mistakes and fight for what truly mattered. The battle against Michael was still to come, and the challenges would continue, but now Rick felt ready to face them, not just as a man, but as a father. The rain had finally stopped, and the sun began to peek through the clouds. It was a new day, and Rick was determined to forge a new path, a path of truth and justice alongside his son. After the heartfelt encounter with Nathan, Rick felt an enormous weight lift off his shoulders. It was as if the rain that had fallen on him had not only washed away the clouds but also the shadows of his insecurities. However, the new determination in his life did not come without challenges. The decision to step away from the corrupt path he had followed for so long was not simple. The consequences of his past choices began to manifest quickly. In the following days, Rick realized that some of his former allies would not accept his change in attitude well. Michael, in particular, became a constant and threatening presence in his life. He felt enraged by Rick's decision to step away from the business and did not hesitate to make that clear. During one of the meetings where Rick attended, only to announce that he would no longer be involved, Michael confronted him with a cold glare. "You really think you can just withdraw and that everything will be fine?" Michael asked, his voice laced with disdain. "You have no idea what's at stake here. If you leave, you will regret it." Rick took a deep breath, feeling his heart race. He knew that Michael was not just talking about business. There was an implicit threat in his words, but the newfound courage he had found helped him respond. "I will no longer be part of this, Michael. What you are doing is wrong, and I cannot move forward like this." Michael's expression changed to anger. "You have no idea what you are about to lose, Rick. Your career, your reputation, and worse, your relationship with your son could be destroyed if you go down this path." Those words cut Rick like a knife. He knew that Michael was referring to the risks he would face by opposing the system he had helped to build, but he also understood that his relationship with Nathan was more important than any career or reputation. Determined not to be intimidated, Rick left the meeting feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. He had made a decision, but the future was uncertain. At home, Rick tried to connect with Nathan, but the tension still lingered between them. The young man was busy with his awareness activities, and Rick felt a bit out of place. He wanted to get more involved, but he didn't know how. One night, while watching a news report about a protest that Nathan had organized, Rick decided it was time to take a step forward. "Can I go with you to the next protest?" he asked, his voice hesitant. Nathan looked at him in surprise. "Do you really want to do this, Dad? It's not safe. Things can get intense." "I know, but I need to be by your side. I want to learn, I want to help," Rick replied, his sincerity shining through in every word. Nathan hesitated, but soon a smile began to form on his face. "That would be amazing. Thank you for wanting to be here with me." From that day on, Rick dedicated himself to learning more about the issues Nathan advocated for. He began reading books, watching documentaries, and meeting with community groups. Although he was enthusiastic, he also faced resistance from some community members who did not trust his change. He was seen as someone who had lost his way before, and many were skeptical about his new stance. Acknowledging this, Rick decided he needed to prove his worth. He volunteered to help organize a local event where people could come together and discuss social justice issues. However, the event soon became the target of criticism. Some accused him of merely trying to clean up his image, which hit him deeply. What should have been a new beginning seemed to be turning into yet another obstacle. In a moment of introspection, Rick sat alone in his office, reflecting on everything that was happening. He felt like he was on an emotional roller coaster. The determination to change and be a good father propelled him forward, but external pressure and voices from the past made him doubt himself. He remembered the conversation with Lisa and Nathan's words. He was not fighting just for himself, but for a future that his son deserved. When the day of the event arrived, Rick was nervous but determined. He stepped up and spoke about his failures, publicly acknowledging his wrong choices. "I am not a model of perfection, but I am here to change and learn. I want to be part of something bigger, and I hope you'll give me a chance," he said, his voice trembling but filled with sincerity. The community's response was mixed. Some people applauded, while others remained skeptical. But looking at Nathan, who was in the audience with an encouraging smile, Rick realized he had already taken an important step. He was battling his own demons, and more importantly, he was fighting for his son. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. Rick looked out the window of his office, observing the city he had known so well, but now seemed strange and distant. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light over the buildings, but his mind was clouded with heavy thoughts. He remembered his former life where success was measured by money and power. Now, however, he wanted something different. He wanted dignity, respect, and above all, a connection with his son, Nathan. The event he had organized was approaching, and Rick felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He knew that the community looked at him with suspicion, and that pressure was almost unbearable. In his sleepless nights, he wondered if he could really change. The voices of the past echoed in his mind, reminding him of his failures and broken promises. When the day of the event arrived, Rick was nervous. He prepared as if it were an important presentation, rehearsing his words in front of the mirror. Upon arriving at the venue, he felt the tension in the air. The place was filled with people, some with expressions of expectation, others with critical looks. He took a deep breath and decided that it didn't matter what others thought. He was there to be honest and to show Nathan that he was willing to fight. When Rick stepped onto the stage, his heart raced. He looked at the audience and saw Nathan, who was watching him with an encouraging gaze. With a firm gesture, Rick began to speak. He shared his story, the wrong choices he had made, and how he had reached a breaking point. He admitted that he was not perfect, that he had made mistakes, and that some of them had cost him dearly, but he was there because he wanted to change. He wanted to learn and grow, and he hoped they would give him a chance to do that. The words flowed from his mouth like a catharsis, and soon he felt a wave of relief. To his surprise, some people started to applaud. There was a group that seemed to understand him, and this gave Rick a new perspective. He realized that even though many still did not trust him, there were others who were willing to listen and give a second chance. In the following days, Rick continued to engage with the community. He began to listen to people's stories, their struggles and hopes. Each conversation helped him understand that success would no longer be measured in money or status, but in the connections he formed and the changes he could help create. He offered to help with community projects, and even though he faced resistance, he started to earn the trust of some. With each small step, he felt like he was rebuilding himself. Meanwhile, his relationship with Nathan also began to flourish. They started to share more moments together, discussing the issues that mattered to them. Rick saw the sparkle in his son's eyes when they talked about their dreams and aspirations. Nathan began to see him not as the distant father he had been, but as someone willing to fight by his side. This new dynamic brought a sense of joy and hope to both of them. But not everything was easy. Michael and some of Rick's old allies were not ready to let him be. The threats began to escalate, and Rick found himself in a dilemma. He could revert to the old path, where security was guaranteed, or continue fighting for an uncertain future, but one that was worth it. He decided that he would not back down. Fear could not dictate his choices. On a particularly difficult night, Rick sat at the table with Nathan and shared his concerns. He confessed that sometimes he felt like he was fighting against everything and everyone, and that he might fail again. Nathan looked at him with an expression of understanding. He reassured Rick that everyone was afraid, but emphasized that Rick was doing the right thing and that he was there by his side. These words touched Rick's heart. He realized that, despite all the challenges, he was not alone. The friendship that had developed between them was stronger than any obstacle they faced. With Nathan's and the community's support, Rick began to understand that true strength came from within, and that each step he took toward change was a victory. Thus, Rick continued to rise after each fall, learning from his mistakes and applying the lessons life had taught him. He discovered that true overcoming was not just about winning external battles, but also about facing the internal demons that haunted him. As he strove to build a new life, the certainty that he was on the right path propelled him forward, not just for himself, but for Nathan, and for all those who needed hope for a better world. Night had fallen, and the event Rick had organized was about to begin. He stood behind the stage with sweaty palms and a racing heart. The atmosphere was tense. The room was full, but he could not ignore the murmur of distrust hanging in the air. Michael, his former business partner and rival, was present, and Rick knew he was not there to support him. The pressure mounted as Rick prepared to announce a new community project, which symbolized not only his redemption, but also the future he wanted to build alongside Nathan. Looking out at the audience, he saw his son's face. Nathan was sitting in the front row, his eyes full of expectation and an encouraging smile on his lips. His presence was a reminder of what truly mattered. Rick took a deep breath and with a determined gesture stepped onto the stage. But before he could begin, Michael stood up. He had a disdainful air and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He sarcastically questioned Rick's intentions, suggesting that he was nothing more than a man who had lost himself in his own game. The audience murmured, and the tension was palpable. Rick felt his stomach tighten. This was the moment he had feared. He knew he needed to respond, but the words seemed to fail him. However, when he looked at Nathan again, he realized he was not just fighting for himself. He was fighting for his son, for the new life they were both trying to build together. With a renewed sense of determination, Rick faced Michael and declared that he was not there to deceive anyone but to be honest about his past and show that it was possible to change. The audience fell silent, and Rick continued, acknowledging his mistakes. Errors that cost me a lot, including my relationship with my son, but I am no longer that man. I chose a different path, and I hope you can give me a chance to prove it. He felt the energy in the room shift. Some people started nodding, others even murmured words of support. Michael, however, was not willing to give up. Do you really think the community will believe you? You're only here because of your son, because you know you need him to redeem yourself. He laughed, but Rick noticed that not everyone was laughing. Some people in the audience began to get agitated, and the atmosphere changed. The tension rose, but there was a new energy pulsing in the room, that of hope. Rick took a deep breath once again. He knew this was his moment. Yes, Nathan is an important part of my life now, and it's for him that I am fighting. But it's not just for him. It's for each of you, for every story of struggle and overcoming that I've heard in the past few months. I am not perfect, but I am willing to work hard to make a difference. At that moment, something inside Rick lit up. He remembered the conversations he had with the community, the difficulties many faced, and the victories they had achieved together. He realized he was not alone on this journey. We all face challenges, he continued, his voice stronger, and we all deserve a second chance. Not just me, but everyone who wants to change, who wants to overcome. Let's work together to create a better future. Rick's words resonated in the room. He saw some people stand up, applauding him. Nathan was in the front row with tears in his eyes, proud of the father he was becoming. The audience began to unite, and the sound of applause grew. Even some of the critics started to applaud, and the positive energy took over the environment. Michael, realizing he had lost the battle, withdrew, but Rick didn't care. He had faced his greatest challenge, and in doing so, discovered his true strength. He had overcome not only the distrust of others, but also his own insecurities. At the end of the presentation, Rick stepped off the stage, feeling light. He hugged Nathan, who greeted him with a tight embrace. "You were amazing, Dad," the boy said. The emotion of that moment was indescribable. Rick felt that despite his past, he had found a new purpose. He was not just fighting for himself, but for all those who believed that change was possible. That day, Rick not only began a new chapter in his life, but also started to build a new narrative for his community. He realized that true success was not about being rich or famous, but about building meaningful connections and helping others find their own voices. And above all, he learned that true personal overcoming is a continuous journey, full of ups and downs, but worth taking. After the presentation, Rick felt a wave of relief and joy. The warmth of the applause still echoed in his mind, but he knew that this victory was just the beginning. As he walked off the stage, he encountered various faces. Some people stopped to congratulate him, others looked at him with curiosity, and even a few old acquaintances seemed more receptive. "Rick, you really touched all our hearts. It was moving to hear your words," said a middle-aged woman with a genuine smile. He smiled back, feeling that connection was a sign that the path he had chosen was the right one. Nathan, still by his side, seemed to burst with happiness. "Dad, you were amazing! I knew you could do it." The boy jumped into his arms, and Rick hugged him tightly, feeling tears of pride welling up in his eyes. He had done this for Nathan, but also for himself, and for all who wanted to believe in change. As they moved away from the stage, Rick noticed that Michael was still around in a corner, talking to some people. The former partner seemed more isolated than ever, and Rick couldn't help but feel a mix of compassion and relief. He knew the weight of rivalry had dissipated, even if not completely. "Dad, do you think Michael will continue to be a problem?" Nathan asked, looking at the man who had always been a shadow in their lives. Rick thought for a moment before responding. "I think we all have our own challenges, Nathan. The important thing is that we cannot let the past define who we are. I am here to do what is right, and I hope he finds his way too." Later, as they sat in a nearby cafe, Rick reflected on everything that had happened. He looked at Nathan, who was engrossed in a piece of cake, and felt that life was finally moving in the direction he had always wanted. "You know, son, I realize that change is not easy, but it is worth it. I am learning this every day." Nathan nodded, full of wisdom for his age. "I know, Dad. Sometimes people just need a reason to believe they can change." Those words touched Rick deeply. He realized that even amid his struggles, his son had an incredible understanding of what it meant to grow and overcome challenges. That night, as Rick prepared for bed, he took a moment to reflect on the event and its aftermath. He felt a new strength within himself, a determination to continue working for his community. The conversations he had with the residents after the presentation left him excited. Many expressed their willingness to join him and Nathan in projects that could truly make a difference. However, the reality of his past still haunted him. He knew that not everyone would be willing to forgive and forget. But, as Rick reflected on his journey up to that point, he understood that forgiveness was not something he could demand from others. Building trust would take time, and he was ready for that. The next morning, while walking to work, Rick encountered some neighbors he hadn't seen in a long time. They greeted him with smiles and words of encouragement. This brought a new brightness to his day. He realized that the change he sought affected not only his life but also the lives of those around him. Every small gesture, every conversation, every act of kindness contributed to a more positive environment. And so, with his heart full of hope, Rick decided that from that day forward, every step would be towards the future that he and Nathan deserved. Life would still have challenges, but now he felt prepared to face them. He was not just fighting for himself, he was fighting for an entire community. And with the support of his son and new friendships, Rick felt that he could finally achieve what he had always wanted, a place where everyone could find hope and strength to change their own stories. Rick looked out the window as the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and pink. He reflected on the journey he had made. From the moment he decided to change his life, facing his fears and past mistakes, to that instant where he felt not only victory, but true transformation within himself. He had learned that success was not just about recognition, but about making a difference in the lives of the people around him. The presentation had been a turning point. Rick had not only shared his story, but had also shown many that change was possible. He remembered Nathan's words, his son, who had always encouraged him to believe in himself. The boy was not just his son, he was his greatest ally and source of inspiration. Together, they were building a legacy of hope and overcoming challenges. But as Rick looked to the future, he also remembered Michael. The former partner had been an important part of his life, but the rivalry that had united them seemed to have dissipated, giving way to a new understanding. Rick felt that although things between them were not perfect, there was room for forgiveness and reconciliation. He decided it was time to take the first step. A simple invitation for coffee could be the beginning of a new chapter. That night, Rick went to bed with a smile on his face. He realized that life was made of new beginnings, and each day brought the opportunity to learn something new. He dreamed of the future he could build, not just for himself and Nathan, but for the entire community. The conversations he had after the presentation became seeds for new ideas and collaborative projects. Rick was determined to turn those ideas into reality. In the days that followed, he began working on a community project that would bring people together around activities that promoted unity and solidarity. With the support of Nathan and many neighbors, The project came to life. The meetings were full of energy, and people began to get to know each other better, creating bonds that had not existed before. Rick saw how friendship and collaboration could change lives, and how a simple act could have a profound impact. However, amid this new phase, Rick could not forget the past. He decided that if he truly wanted to free himself from Michael's shadow, he would need to confront him. One afternoon he approached his former partner, and with sincerity spoke about his hopes and fears. Michael, surprisingly, also shared his struggles and frustrations. The conversation, which began tense, quickly transformed into an honest dialogue. Both realized that their rivalries were merely reflections of personal insecurities. They exchanged promises of mutual support, and Rick felt that he had finally overcome that dark chapter of his life. Now, with a light heart and a new determination, Rick felt ready to face any challenge that arose. He had learned that true revenge was not about getting back at those who had hurt him, but about rising above the pain and transforming his experiences into something positive. He was at peace with himself and with those around him. Rick looked at Nathan, who was watching him with a smile. He understood that the lessons he had learned were valuable. Life was a journey of growth and learning, and what really mattered was how he could positively impact the world around him. He was eager to hear the stories of others who, like him, faced challenges and found the strength to change. If you identified with Rick's journey, share your own experiences in the comments. What lessons have you learned in your life that might inspire others? Together, we can build a stronger and more supportive community. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. Your interaction is essential for us to continue bringing content that touches hearts and transforms lives. Let's take action now and make a difference together.